What's up guys, Andrew Bainey here with my friend Johnny in the flesh. Finally, it's been a while since we've done a video in person together, and this is a special occasion. Today, we are going to be talking about why your Thall riffs suck. But what it actually is just a lesson in disguise because we needed to make a nice, cool little clickbaity title for YouTube. So for this video, basically, I gave Johnny the task of writing a short Thall song, and essentially what we're gonna do is we're gonna play through that song and explain what is going on and some generic Thall techniques that you can use to hopefully make your riffs a little bit more exciting. So, obviously, since Johnny wrote the song, he's in the video because some of this stuff he can explain way better than me. But I'm going to be talking about more of like the production aspect of things, I guess you could say, whereas Johnny's going to be talking more about the music theory side of things. So as I mentioned, first and foremost, we are going to be showing you guys what the full generic Thall song sounds like in just a minute. Before that, we do have a quick message from the sponsor of this video, Nail the Mix. The sponsor for this video is one that I am personally really excited about, and I actually used it in this video to help us make this song and this mix. And that sponsor is Nail the Mix. If you're into audio production at all, you've probably heard of their amazing website already, but in case you haven't, let me break it down for you real quick. Nail the Mix is the best online school for rock and metal producers where you can learn directly from world-class producers themselves. This month's special guest is Buster Odom, and that is very exciting to me. As you can guess from the context of this video being all about Thall, it's super cool to see him doing a guest lesson over on Nail the Mix because he is basically the godfather of this genre, and you can learn a ton of useful tips and tricks from the man himself. On this month's lesson, he's going to be mixing 3 different songs from Born of Osiris, Oceano, and Alt, and in addition to that, you can download all of the raw multi-tracks for each song. And in addition to that, you also get access to a live stream where he's going to mix those songs from scratch and answer any questions that you might have. You can also enter the monthly mixing competition where you can win a massive prize package with gear and plugins from Kali Audio, Neural DSP, Bogren Digital, Joey Sturgis Tones, and more. In addition to that, you'll also get sessions from Devin Townsend, Dance Gavin Dance, Ginger, Angels and Airwaves, Monuments, dozens of super detailed mixing tutorials, private members only forum, and more. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, definitely go check out the link in the description or the pinned comment below to get started on Nail the Mix for just $1 for your first month. Okay, so with that being said, we're going to show you guys the full Thall song, but stay tuned. Again, we'll be explaining in detail all of the different techniques that are going on. Here's what it sounds like. So now that we showed you guys the full song, we're going to start breaking it down. The first technique that we want to talk about is bending all of the notes. There are bends all over this entire song. Johnny, did you want to explain why that is?
It's just like a tonality thing that comes with Thall, and it's not like your traditional bend where you're like that kind of bend. So a lot in this song, what I wrote was stuff that kind of went like really quick bends up, or I guess up. Mm-hmm. Is that up or down?
It's both. So
it's both.
Yeah. So in this example of the first riff that we're gonna be talking about, it does a little bit of both. it does like these really quick bends, which is what Johnny's referring to, where it just kind of goes, it's not necessarily a pre-bend, but you're just bending higher and then back down really, really fast, and then letting it kind of ring out at that lower note again, like that. And then there's also an alternative bend where it just very slowly raises in pitch. So like that, which is, I guess, a little more like a traditional bend, which you were referring to. So it kind of does a combination of both, but it almost does it in a way that sounds uncomfortable or like dissonant, but not quite dissonant. It's strange.
A lot of just riff work within Thall is made to make you feel uncomfortable when it comes from like even the tone or how the riff is played. It's just meant to make you feel a little bit off kilter, whether that's like going against the click, whether it's the rhythm fucking with your head, or it's literally just really weird, like just to keep you on your toes. Mm-hmm. Because as you'll see as we go through, nothing about this stays the same ever.
Yeah, and in addition to that, another aspect of this first riff, which again also happens throughout the song, is they'll do the same bend but in different places on the neck. So even though in some instances during this riff we're doing that, in others we're doing that. Even though it's the same note, for some reason it sounds just a little bit different, and adding in those subtle little variables, I guess you could say, just really does help make a difference to the song. Originally when Johnny wrote this, he actually wrote it doing a 24th fret bend, but I changed it in the recording so it was the 17th, because honestly I just think it's way easier to play. Yeah. But maybe you could explain why you wanted to do it so much higher.
Just listen to the tonality difference between the three octaves that we're talking about. So like the 12th fret on the E string, on the high E, or second,
the middle E.
The middle E string. So that has its own tonality. And then 17th sounds a little bit more similar in timbre, but the 24th is it just sounds like, once again, going back to how it makes you feel uncomfortable. You know, like, what that note is, and you know it's an octave, but for some reason it sounds different. Yeah.
So that's pretty much it in terms of the techniques that were used in the first riff. So we're just going to go over that example of the riff one more time with tabs on the screen so you can see how it's played right now. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the second example that happens in the song, which is the quote-unquote clean section. So during this section, the rhythm guitars are doing a very strange rhythmic pattern, but in addition to being strange, they're also leaving a ton of empty space. So a really important thing with Thall music is you gotta fill that space with something else. You know, if the rhythm guitars, to be specific, aren't doing much, you really have to fill that space with something else. And in the case of Thall, what they often do is fill it with a lot of clean ambience. And again, in the example song, you can hear that Johnny did a lot of that.
Yeah, a lot of, like, the thing with Thall is, yeah, the riffs are crazy and, like, it's a lot of just, like, doing brutal stuff, but a lot of it is built around the ambience, which creates the mood of the song, which I think does a lot of the heavy lifting. Especially for the breakdown section of this song, I purposely left space to create more spooky vibes, I guess, if you want to call it that. A lot of the clean stuff is very, very reminiscent of Tesseract as well. Like, if you listen to a lot of their first records, it's a lot of very plucky single note clean stuff. Thall is very much the same way, where you're picking your notes very hard and letting them ring, and also using bending techniques like we talked before to make it feel uneasy. They do a lot of single note stuff, but it does include a lot of like minor second notes, which is basically just like your root, and then the second note is a half step away, which is basically the first two notes of a triad, which you would call dissonant.
Sure.
Like the devil's chord, if you want to call it that. The clean part is the simple part of the song. What makes it complex is you can do it in a way that it repeats, but it usually falls over the bar line, especially when you have a riff underneath that is
not in 4/4.
Not in 4/4, not repeating what it does, and is constantly pushing the meter. So your grounding point, or how I wrote this anyways, your grounding point is your clean pattern, because that is the thing that stays consistent, where everything else around it is manipulated.
But the tricky part is, again, like you were saying, the time signatures are changing. So even though you're playing the same notes, the placement of those notes has to be different because it will sound completely off if it's, you know, let's say like fighting the rhythm guitar.
Yeah.
So in, I think the first repetition, for example, you had to hold out some of those notes like a quarter note longer than your brain would normally do.
Yeah.
And it's weird to think about, but it's one of those things where if you don't listen to it with a click, for some reason it just makes sense, but as soon as you listen to it in terms of like the time signatures, it's so much harder to keep track of what you're doing.
Andrew hates this, but the way I record a lot of my stuff is I don't record with a downbeat, so everything I record is in 1/4. So a lot of this stuff I write with feel, and I don't write with theory in mind. I don't write thinking this part's going to be in 7/4.
Yeah.
I just write it, and then afterwards when I have to tab it out for Andrew, I analyze the time signatures. But like, even without knowing what the time signature is, when I wrote the clean part, I'm like, okay, well, I can't do this in an even meter. I have to hold out notes longer or shorter to make it at least make some kind of sense, because everything else that's happening underneath it makes no sense. So.
Okay, well that's pretty much all the explanation for this part, so Johnny's going to show you guys what that clean section sounds like. Okay, so the next example we want to talk about is a common one if you've seen my other videos on subjects like this. Of course, we're talking about dissonance. It's used pretty much across all metal or metalcore or core genres, if you will. But in Thall, it's used a tiny bit differently. So in standard, you know, deathcore or metalcore, it's usually like those high pitched like panic chords, I think is what a lot of people call them. But in Thall, again, what they do a lot more than that is they actually use the dissonant on those bends. So again, we're talking about those strange bends that are on the high notes of the low strings. And to make them sound extra weird, you just layer it with a second guitar. So for example, if I'm playing a bend on the 17th fret, Johnny would be playing a bend on the 16th fret, which would sound like this. So it sounds a little weird out of context of the song, but that is what's happening in the riff that we're mentioning in this section. There's also a couple of other parts that are dissonant throughout the song. During one of the more straightforward riffs later, we're doing that, which is just a 2-3 on the B and the E string, but then I'm actually whammying it up an octave, so it helps give even more separation between that low note and the chord. It basically just brings that chord up an octave, and it also makes it way easier to play. So instead of jumping from the first fret to like way up here, I can just keep my hands all around here, and I'm just controlling everything with a whammy pedal instead. But for this example, we'll show you a little clip of what some of the dissonance sounds like. This. Okay, so for the next example, what we're going to talk about is pitch shifting. This is used across all Thall music super commonly. In this particular song, we're using it in two different ways. So we're doing both a whammy or pitch shift up as well as down. So during one section of the song, we are actually pitch shifting down an octave, which I know is ridiculous because we're already tuned to drop E on an 8-string guitar, but it actually does drop even farther than that to like double drop E, I guess you could call it.
It's a full octave below.
So it would be, you know, an octave lower than a bass guitar, essentially. It's stupid, but it sounds awesome.
I think it's commonly used because, to go back to it for a third time, it just makes you feel it makes you feel uncomfortable.
The moral of this video is, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think before, like when Viljarda was first starting, they really didn't use this whammy stuff too much. It was more when Buster started doing Humanity's Last Breath, where it was like fully utilized, and songs like depended on it for riffs and everything. So if you ever listen to the early Humanity's Last Breath, and then even, you know, Detester and everything else, like, he does shifting low, he does shifting high, he does it to completely change tunings, like. Lots of stuff, but another modern example is Logan from Reflections does a lot of that in his solo project.
And in Reflections.
And in Reflections itself, where they play in a double drop D tuning, and then they go full octave down as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of like a stylistic choice, just because they wanted to do it and they can. It's gratuitous, but it's fun. That's why I did it in this. It's just because it makes like those open notes in the breakdown just sound so much heavier and just super brutal.
Yeah, and then speaking for the high pitched example is pretty much the exact same reason. However, an additional benefit to that is, of course, when your guitar is already tuned super low for the majority of the song, it makes those low parts sound even heavier and even lower if it's coupled with a way higher note. And again, one reason that Buster in particular does this across Humanity's Last Breath is because he also only uses a 6-string baritone, so he actually doesn't have these 2 high strings. So for him to, you know, still achieve those super high notes, a really easy way to do that is to simply whammy up or pitch shift up. And from a player's perspective, from my perspective, I find it way easier to play because, again, instead of jumping from like the 1st fret to the 12th fret all the time, which is just tiring and honestly a little bit hard to do, instead of doing that, you can just simply step on a pedal to pitch shift everything up and you can just comfortably stay down here. So it's a little bit of like a practicality thing, and it also just helps those impacts feel even more impactful than they might have otherwise. Okay, so our final example is actually not a guitar example. We wanted to take a minute to talk about the role of the bass guitar in Thall music. So the weird thing about the bass in a lot of this song is the bass is actually not doing nearly as much as the guitars are doing. So for example, when the guitars are doing those like high-pitched bends, like the bass just isn't doing anything. And again, this kind of goes back to what I was just talking about in my pitch shift speech, is with the bass only coupling with the low notes, it again just helps those low notes to stand out and be even more heavy. Is the bass just takes a break, lets the guitars do the thing, and then comes back in when it wants to make that note super impactful. We're not going to play bass in this video, but I'll show you guys an example of what it sounds like in the context of the mix.
The bass does do a lot of the heavy lifting in those huge impact parts, especially because the tonality for the guitar in the context of this subgenre is like, it doesn't have a lot of low end in it. It's kind of meant to be more of like a
mid-range for sure.
A mid-range thing, and then the bass fills out the rest of that frequency, especially like in those breakdown moments where the guitars are doing all the crazy high timbre bends and all that kind of stuff, and then the bass just hits you really hard. So the bass definitely doesn't play as much of an active role, I would say, where it copies everything the guitar does. It sits back and creates that uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah, in a way it almost has the same impact as the clean ambience, sort of, in the way that it's really just there to maximize the impact of certain sections of the riffs or the songs, rather than being the focal point of the music, if you will. For our sake, we did have the bass tuned a full octave down from the guitar, which I know is probably pretty crazy and not everyone can do that because that's already really low, but in our case, yes, the bass was tuned down an octave. I know there are some bands who do unison, meaning the bass and the guitar are in the same tuning. In my opinion, it definitely does sound heavier having the bass a lower octave. I also understand that that's kind of hard to do because you need like super thick strings or, you know, like a specialty bass that can do that. Great resource for this is actually, again, the sponsor of this video. In Buster's Nail the Mix video, he talks a lot about mixing guitar tones. And a big part of that is the guitar's relationship to the bass. So I'm not going to go into that in this video because, again, you can go check out Buster's full lesson to learn more about that. But before we move on to the outro of the video, this is how the bass sounds in context to some of these riffs, and you guys will see what we mean in terms of it only impacting certain notes. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you learned something new that you can implement into your guitar riffs or your song structures. Again, a huge thank you to Johnny because he wrote the song. Like I said, he is way more versed in the Thall life than I am, so I couldn't have done this video without him. So definitely go follow his YouTube channel. He's got tons of good stuff over there. And yeah, if you want to mention anything else.
Yeah, if you want to check out a song of ours that we did called Fear that has a section at the end of it that is very reminiscent of Thall.
Definitely.
Check out that song and then head over to my channel and watch the lesson breakdown of that riff because it uses a lot of the same techniques used in this video as well. So head over there, zippity-doo-dah.
Also, of course, go listen to our band Carcosa. We're not necessarily that Thall, but we do take a lot of influence from some of the projects that Buster has been in, namely Humanity's Last Breath. We're definitely more on the deathcore side of things, but nonetheless, if you enjoy this type of music, you might like our band as well. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Last but not least, of course, go check out the link to the sponsor, which is going to be in the pinned comment and the description below. And of course, last but not least, a big thank you to all my Patreon members whose names are on the screen at this point in time. If you want audio downloads, guitar tabs, stems, or a shout out on the screen, you can find all of that over there. Thank you guys for watching. We look forward to reading all of your comments, and we'll see you next time.